Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. My name is Lee. I'm a biblical expositor and counselor, and this channel is for absolutely anyone who wants to experience the abundant life that Jesus promised, not just spiritually, but mentally, emotionally, and relationally as well. Here we talk about psycho-spiritual formation, mental health through a biblical worldview, how real change actually happens, real transformation, and how to become free, and more importantly, how to stay free. So if that's something you're interested in, you've come to the right place, and I'd love to invite you to hit subscribe and join the family. Now, today I'm talking a little bit about attachment. And more specifically, I'm talking about what happens when our early experiences of attachment leave wounds that we carry into every relationship we have for the rest of our lives. You have no doubt experienced this, and you have no doubt brought these attachment wounds or formations, if you will, into relationships, whether that's with spouses or boyfriends or girlfriends, significant others, best friends, children, coworkers, employees, employers. And so I have a high suspicion that this video will probably relate in some way, shape, or form. At least I hope it does, and I hope it adds a lot of value to you. Now, I want to be clear from the very beginning. This video and this idea about attachment in general is not about blaming your parents or your childhood, okay? That is sometimes the natural path people go towards when we talk about attachment. And I want to begin by saying, let's not do that, because it's not healthy and that's not the goal. It doesn't help anything. Matter of fact, our parents did the best that they could with what they had, most of us. But the reality is that many of us grew up in homes where we didn't consistently experience what we needed most, right? Which is someone fully present with us, someone attuned to what was happening inside of us. And that absence, that misattunement, leaves a mark on our spirit as we are formed, as we grow older. These early lifehood experiences really shape and form who we become. Good news is we can do the work to reshape a lot of that. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about what I mean specifically by attachment wounds, okay? So in the 1950s, 1960s, a British psychiatrist named John Bowlby started observing what happened to children who are separated from their caregivers. All right, what he discovered during that time fundamentally changed how we understand human development. He found that children have this built-in need not just for food or warmth, but for emotional connection. And it's not just children, might I add. You don't outgrow this need for emotional connection. It is a fundamentally human need. And a lot of times when working with marriages, we live in this society where men are very cognitively and physically driven. And so this emotional connection piece tends to get the stigma of it's a woman thing. And it's just not. It is a human thing. Men, without going too deep into it, we'll save it for another video, just don't recognize that they need emotional connection. They don't actually know what it is or what it looks like. And quite frankly, neither do most women. And this is why we end up with a lot of conflict in our relationships. So nevertheless, I digress. Children need this emotional connection, and they need someone who sees them, someone who responds to them, someone who helps them make sense of what they're feeling. And when that happens consistently, when a parent or a caregiver is present and responsive, the child develops what we call secure attachment. They learn at a deeper level let me say it this way. They learn at a level deeper than just words that the world is safe, that people can be trusted, and that their needs matter. But when it doesn't happen consistently, when the caregiver is absent, unpredictable, or frightening, the child adapts to that. They adapt to that world. The brain forms protective mechanisms to do just that, to protect them from harm or threat or pain. And they develop strategies to even protect themselves from things such as anxiety, like the anxiety of not knowing if anyone will be there. And these adaptations become what we call insecure attachment patterns. They lead to maladaptive behaviors. They lead to a whole host of our problems in life, and usually our inability to connect. It usually is a core root of why marriages fall apart and relationships with parents and children break apart, is because of these insecure attachment patterns. And here's the thing that most people don't actually realize. These patterns don't just stay in childhood, right? They, like I've said earlier, they become this almost blueprint of how we relate to everyone, our spouses, our children, our friends, and even God. And some people develop what's called an anxious attachment. Maybe their caregiver was inconsistent, sometimes warm and available, sometimes distant and preoccupied. So the child learns to anxiously monitor, right, the relationship, to cling, to protest loudly when there's any sign of disconnection. And they carry this into adulthood. And suddenly they're the person who needs constant reassurance, who panics when their spouse seems emotionally distant, who can't tolerate being alone, who has to have constant notifications on with the phone, like knowing where their spouse's phone is, right? Where are they at? What are they doing? Are they safe? Are they alive? Are they betraying me? And so on and so forth. Are we good? Is our relationship good, safe, and secure? Others develop an avoidant attachment. And maybe their caregiver was consistently dismissive of their needs, specifically their emotional needs. Or maybe they were told to toughen up, stop crying, handle it themselves, right? So the child learns to shut down their need for connection, to become self-sufficient, to not depend on anyone. They grow up to be adults who say they don't need much from relationships, who pull away when things get too intimate, who intellectualize their feelings rather than feel them. And then there are people who experienced more severe inconsistency or even frightening caregiving, right? And what we call disorganized attachment. And their caregiver was both the source of comfort and the source of fear. And these folks, they often struggle with intense fear of abandonment alongside a deep distrust of closeness. I think that's a good way to say it. They want connection quite desperately, but they can't tolerate it when they have it. If that sounds familiar to you, this is a disorganized attachment. Now, if you're listening to this and you're starting to recognize maybe yourself in any of this, I want you to just take a breath for a moment. All right, this is not supposed to be any form of conviction or condemnation or anything like that. This is actually, the intention here is to bring hope and lots of it. Because once we understand what's happening, once we see the pattern, we can start to do something about it. And the question is this: what heals attachment wounds? Because if the attachment wounds are a core root to a lot of my problems in my marriage, with my kids, in my own personal life, I would like that to be healed in some respect, right? To move forward and to stop seeing these maladaptive behaviors showing up and the consequences that it's having on the people I love most. So what heals attachment wounds? And this is where I want to introduce you to a concept that might sound simple, but is actually quite profound. And it's called attunement. And attunement is when another person is fully present to you, right? Not just physically present, not just providing, not just making sure everything is taken care of, not just someone who is incredibly reliable and you don't have to lift a finger or ever worry about tasks, responsibilities, because they are just on top of it and providing. They're bending over backwards and working very, very hard. That's all amazing. That's all needed. That all should be celebrated. And there should be a lot of thankfulness and gratitude for that, but that's not attunement, okay? So this attunement goes beyond this, right? It's not just a physical presence. It's an emotional and mental presence. It's when someone pays attention to what's happening inside of you, when they're sensitive to your emotional state, how you're feeling, your inner world, what it must be like to be you. And when they respond in a way that helps you feel felt, someone else gets what it's like to be me in this moment. And they connect with that. And that last phrase that I said here is incredibly important. Feeling felt. It's not just about being understood intellectually. And this is where a lot of men in particularly get hung up, right? It's like, I see what you're saying, or I understand. And then men really struggle to validate and comfort their children or wives sometimes, because they're like, well, if I was you, I would do things differently, because they're up here in the logic of things. They're up here trying to be like, my way is right or my way is better. I would do it differently. Let me help you do it differently so you feel better. And that comes from such a noble, loving, genuine place, but it is not attunement, and it is not making your loved one feel felt. All right. And this is what heals attachment wounds, is the attunement. So if you want to contribute to the healing of your spouse's attachment wounds, if you want to contribute to the secure attachment of your children as they grow, you must learn attunement. You must learn when you are not attuning, right? The good things you do that you think are the displays of your love, and they are good. Don't stop doing them. Please don't undervalue them, but they are not attunement, and attunement is needed most, okay? It's the experience of having your inner world recognized and validated by another person, a person you love and respect. The psychologist Dan Siegel talks about attunement as a kind of resonance, when one's nervous system tunes into another nervous system. Think about it like this, right? If you ever sat with someone who was anxious, you probably felt your own anxiety rising to some degree. Or if you've been around someone who's calm and centered, you might have noticed yourself finding a peace, a settling down, right? That's an example of nervous system resonance. And we're wired to pick up on each other's internal states. But attunement is more than just picking up on someone else's internal state, right? It's the intentional act of joining them there. Okay, that's it. That's the key. The intentional act of joining them there, of being with them and what they're experiencing, to let yourself feel and experience what they must be feeling or experiencing. And by the way, this leads us towards empathy. And then from empathy towards compassion, which we see in the life of Jesus. The Gospels say over and over again that Jesus had compassion on people and then met their needs. But this compassion came from empathy. This empathy came from Jesus' ability to put himself in the shoes of other people and feel what they must be feeling, even though he could probably say, like, you're doing this to yourself. Here's all you need to do to change, and all you need to do to experience a different type of life. He could have had that rationale, but instead of that, even though all those things were true and he would have been right, he took time to feel what they must be feeling, which led him to being a compassionate individual in their life. Now, this is crucial. Attunement is also helping them move toward regulation and toward a sense of groundedness. So not only is it just this internal this internal connection of nervous systems, it's also the intentional act of joining them there. And it's also helping them move towards regulation and a sense of safety and groundedness, which helps heal attachment wounds that we bring into our marriage, that we bring into our adult life, and so on and so forth. And so if you're a parent, knowing this is amazing, because when a parent is attuned to a baby, they notice when the baby is getting overwhelmed. They see this subtle shift in the baby's face, the way their body tenses or their breathing changes. And then if they're a good parent, they respond, not by dismissing the baby's distress, not by getting anxious themselves, but by offering a calm presence. They might speak softly. They may hold the baby gently, or whatever way they're helping this baby's nervous system settle. And that baby learns through thousands of these micro interactions that their distress is okay, it can be tolerated, and that they won't be alone in it. This is what many of us did not get or did not get enough of. And this is what we're still looking for, even as adults. And in our marriage, we're looking for this, and your children are looking for this from you. And the good news is and I mean this sincerely, is that our brains remain plastic throughout our lives. And we can form new neural pathways. I think I say this in almost every video because this is a hope that we have. We can learn new patterns of relating. Attachment wounds can and do heal, but they heal the same way they were formed, through relationship. This is why you can't just isolate yourself. This is why you need community. This is why you need to be known, a deep, intimate relationship. And this is why God created marriage and family, because he designed us to need that. And it's not just in these settings, it's through repeated experiences of attunement. I just put out a video that talks about how God uses repetition to renew the mind. And I encourage you to check that out after this video and learn a little bit about why repetition is so important to the human brain and how we're developed, and then lay those truths onto attunement, because attunement works the same way, through repetition. And this is where emotionally focused therapy comes in. Emotionally focused therapy, EFT, was developed by Sue Johnson and is built on attachment theory. The basic idea is that most of our conflicts in relationship, especially in marriage, aren't really about what we think they're about. They're about attachment. They're about the fear of disconnection, the terror of being alone, the desperate need to know that we matter to the other person. When a couple comes into therapy and they're fighting about money or parenting or physical intimacy, what's usually happening underneath is an attachment dance of some sort. One person feels unseen, they may feel important, so they protest in some way, shape, or form. Now, you might be sitting on the other end of the screen saying, I don't protest. Okay, you protest, but implicitly. You're not aware that what you're doing is a protest, because your mind and your heart on the conscious level are not saying this is a protest. It's on the subconscious level. But what's actually happening is a protest, right? You may criticize. You may make demands, right? The other person feels like they can never get it right. So what do? They withdraw or they shut down. And then the first person feels even more abandoned, so they escalate. And the second person feels even more criticized, so they retreat further. And then round and round we go, right? So EFT helps couples see this pattern and then disrupts it by creating moments of deep attunement. I recommend that you seek counseling. By the way, disclaimer here, none of my videos should ever replace professional counseling or therapy. Seeking a licensed therapist or a pastoral counselor of some sort to help you. But if you choose to see a therapist or professional counselor for your marriage or relationship, I highly recommend one that is well-versed in emotionally focused therapy, because I would be willing to bet that some, if not the majority, of the issues in most marriages and even families relate to this attachment issue, and EFT is kind of the gold standard for relationships, right? So EFT helps couples see this pattern and then disrupts it by creating moments of deep attunement, right? The therapist will help each person access and express the vulnerable feelings underneath reactive behaviors, right? Whether that's a fear, longing, a hurt, whatever that is. Usually you may say, well, I'm not fearful or hurt, I'm mad. Well, anger is just, it's a secondary emotion. We often think that that's the core emotion because that's what surfaces, but what lies implicitly beneath it is fear or rejection or pain or something along those natures, right? And then from there, the therapist helps the other person be present to those feelings without defending or withdrawing. When that happens, something begins to shift, okay? Nervous systems of both parties start to settle in a way that perhaps they haven't in years. And then that attachment bond begins to repair, or at least we begin to create an environment where that attachment bond can begin to repair. Okay. I've watched this happen so many times. And I'm not exempt to attachment wounds. I've seen the benefits of attunement in my own personal life and marriage. And it is something that I daily am practicing and I fail at more than I want to. But I have seen the fruits of it in the lives of my children and in my marriage and in other relationships as well. And I have seen what it will do to attachment wounds. For instance, when I receive attunement, I know the effects of that on my attachment wounds, my insecurities, my fears, different things of that nature. And so I'm a living testament. I believe in this because I have tasted the fruit of it in my own life. And so I've not only watched it happen, I've tasted it, and it never stops moving me. And that's one of the reasons I'm making this video today, is because I'm passionate about it and I believe in it, and I believe it can help you if you have the right guidance. So let me tell you now about a very common theme in marriage, okay? And I might have hit on this a little bit earlier, but I'll reiterate some things even if I did. There was a couple that had been married decade, 2 decades, maybe more. They started counseling on the verge of divorce, okay? And this was not any of my clients, by the way. These are clients that I've learned about through my years of studying case studies and different things of that nature. So just to be clear. But I believe that this story happens quite regularly. So the wife would beg for emotional connection. And again, not explicitly, right? That is often done indirectly, right? Often subconsciously, right? These are actions designed to provoke a response, validation, or emotional connection without directly asking for it. That is how things happen the vast majority of times in our relationship, okay? So when I say that the wife was begging, right, for this emotional connection, I need you to know that it was not something that she would say in a counseling session, yeah, I was begging for it. No, the wife may not have even known that's what she needed or wanted, because the begging is usually implicit. It's subconscious, right? Okay? And so I need you to begin to see that. These things may look like sulking. It may look like acting sad or off, and they may not even know why. If the spouse comes and says, why are you acting sad or off? Why are you sulking? They may not even have words to articulate. They're just in a state and they don't know why. But what they're actually doing is begging for emotional connection. They need that. They're lacking it. Maybe they're creating unneeded drama. Maybe they're playing the victim, or they're fishing for compliments. They're fishing for small bits of connection. Maybe their clinging behavior has grown and multiplied. The list can go on of how one can beg for emotional connection implicitly, right? And this is what happens. And this is what the wife began to do. And when the spouse would do these things, the husband would then retreat. They would retreat into work or hobbies and other things, maybe even if he was physically present, he would retreat mentally and emotionally, maybe into his phone or watching sports or movies or whatever he was entertained by. To him, these things were undesirable. They were a bit of a turnoff. And in some cases, they actually even frustrated him. And it would start arguments. And there would be this cycle that maybe you're familiar with that would happen. He didn't know to look at what was going on beneath the actions he was seeing. And we get so stuck on the surface. Really, if we could get a little deeper and figure out the why behind a lot of the things on the surface, it would really create a lot of breakthrough for us. But he didn't know that she had attachment wounds flaring up, that he could actually help heal through attunement. And he didn't know that he would be responding to her through his own attachment wounds. But I'll save that for later. In this case, the classic pursuer-distancer pattern was initiated, the pursuer-withdrawer. And usually in a marriage, one is more pursuer-dominant, one is more withdrawer-dominant, though we have a little of both in each of us. Now, as they explored it, she would actually discover that her anxiety about the relationship came from growing up with a depressed mother who was emotionally unavailable. She learned to scan constantly for signs of rejection. And he realized that his withdrawal came from a childhood where any display of need or emotion was met with criticism from his father. And he learned to handle everything by himself, alone. And this dynamic is present in so many marriages. And it's just as common for these roles to be reversed, where the husband is the anxious soul in the relationship, right? And the wife is the distancer. Once they could see this pattern and understand where it came from, they could start to do something different in their marriage. She learned to express her need for connection without the panic and without criticism. He learned to actually stay present to her emotions without shutting down or trying to fix or trying to logically reason and help her, change this and that so she would be happier and fix her. Why are you feeling this way? Well, let me fix it. If we just don't do A plus B, we won't get C anymore. So let's change the equation, and here, boom, you're happy instead of feeling this way. Okay, so he could stop doing that and learn how to tune. So they practiced attunement for each other. And their marriage, which had felt dead, they had kind of begun to feel like roommates coexisting. They were cordial most of the time. There was no betrayal going on. There was no, bitterness and different things like that. There was the occasional cycle and the arguments and the stuff, but they got along pretty well. They just had no connection. They felt like they were just co-parenting and coexisting. This attunement began to create a spark again, and would lead them towards a very thriving and fruitful marriage and as time went on. Now, here's where I want to bring the Christian dimension of all this, because I think it's essential, and because it grounds everything I've been saying in something deeper than just a therapeutic technique. The Christian vision of human life is fundamentally relational. We are made in the image of a God who exists as Trinity, right? A communion of persons eternally giving and receiving love. We are not meant to be isolated individuals. We are made fundamentally for connection, just like a car is made for gas, to run off gas. We are made for this connection, for knowing others and being known, for loving and being loved. And this isn't just a nice feature of human existence, like we can do without it, but it's nice to have it. No, this is hardwired into us as the most basic neurological need. And when Scripture talks about love, it's not describing a feeling or emotion. I've talked about this a lot in videos because we have to understand what love actually is. Love is not a feeling or emotion because those are involuntary. You can't choose those. You can't turn them on or off. It's always reactionary. If love is a feeling, you're always out of control. And someone else is always in control of whether or not you experience love or that you love others. Love is primarily an action. It's a choice. It's describing a way of being present. In 1 Corinthians 13, right? It's read at every wedding. And we often listen to it in that context. But if we listen to it through the lens of attunement, right? Love is patient. It's kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. That sounds like attunement. It sounds like a person who can stay emotionally regulated, who can be present without defensiveness, who doesn't make other people's experience about themselves. I also think about the command to bear one another's burdens, which is in, I think Paul writes that in Galatians 6, To me, that's attunement as well, right? This willingness to be present to someone else's pain, to let their emotional weight rest on you for a while, to not fix it or minimize it, but simply to be with them in it. Jesus himself, as I mentioned earlier, models this constantly in the Gospels, right? We can watch how he responds to people. He doesn't give these quick answers or platitudes. He doesn't try to solve people's problems in terms of like, hey, well, if you would do this differently or that differently, if you would just show up to the synagogue, if you would just, pay your tithes, if you would just da-da-da-da-da, right? Instead, he pays attention to their soul. He sees the woman at the well not just as a theological discussion partner, but as a person with a story, a person with wounds, right? He doesn't just heal the blind man. No, like that's great that Jesus ministers to the blind man and meets his physical needs, but he asks him, what does he want? Even though that would seem obvious. Because by asking him what he wants, he steps into not the physical realm, but the emotional realm of his soul. He's seeking what this man desires internally before he ministers to the need externally. He's creating a space for the person's experience to be voiced and validated. That is attunement. And perhaps most profoundly, think about the incarnation itself. It's profound, really. God doesn't remain distant from human suffering. He enters into it. He took on flesh. He experienced hunger, exhaustion, and grief. The letter to the Hebrews says that we have a high priest who can sympathize with our weaknesses because he's been tempted in every way that we have. That's the ultimate attunement. God joining us in our experience, not standing apart from it, being unable to relate or feel or connect. When we practice attunement with each other, we're participating in something deeply sacred. We're embodying the kind of love that God has shown us, and we're creating conditions where healing can happen. Now, here's what's very difficult. To attune to someone else, you have to be able to regulate your own nervous system, right? If you're flooded with your own anxiety or anger or defensiveness, you cannot be present to another person. You'll either withdraw to protect yourself or you'll react in ways that escalate the conflict. And this is why healing attachment wounds isn't just about having someone else attune to us, though that's crucial, of course. It's also about learning to attune to ourselves. It's about developing what neuroscience calls interoception. I think I said that right. The ability to notice what's happening in your own body, your own emotional state. When you feel your chest tighten, or your breathing is getting shallow, or you feel this need to put someone in their place or correct or criticize or to defend yourself, can you notice it? Can you name it? When you begin to feel like I need to withdraw and I need to pull back and I need to run, or I need to pursue harder, can you name that? Can you notice it? Can you do something to help yourself settle? That's interoception. And this is where practices like prayer, meditation, therapy, even things like deep breathing or going for a walk, this is where these practices become so incredibly important. And they're not just self-care in the generic sense of the term. They're ways of training your nervous system to stay regulated, to not get hijacked by every trigger or stressor. And the more you can do that for yourself, the more you can be present for others. I think this is part of what Paul means when he's talking about being transformed by the renewing of your mind in Romans 12. And there's so much to that, but I just like to say that it's not just cognitive change. It's a deep rewiring of how you experience and respond to the world. And it happens at least in part through the practices we engage in and the relationships we're embedded in. Now, let me talk specifically about raising children for a moment, because I think this is where attunement is most immediately practical. If you're a parent, one of the greatest gifts you can give your children is your attuned presence. And this doesn't mean being perfect by any means. It doesn't mean never getting frustrated or tired. It means being willing to notice what's happening inside your child and respond with empathy. When your toddler has a meltdown because you gave them the wrong colored cup. They're not being manipulative or bratty. Their prefrontal cortex, which is that part of the brain that handles impulse control and rational thinking, right? It's not fully developed yet. And in this moment of overwhelmed, their prefrontal cortex kind of shuts down and that amygdala fires off and different aspects of their brain that are more fully developed because that prefrontal cortex develops later in life than other parts of the brain. They don't need a lecture in this moment about being grateful that they have a cup, being grateful that they have water and food when so many don't. There's truth in all of that. But what they need is you to help them regulate. You might say something like, you're upset right now. You wanted the blue cup. And I know that's so frustrating. You're naming what they're experiencing on the inside. You're showing them that their feelings actually make sense and that your calm presence is helping their nervous system settle. By the way, that is incredibly hard to do. There's nothing easy about what I just suggested. But over time, through thousands of these little interactions, they internalize your ability to regulate. They learn that emotions aren't dangerous and that they can be felt and managed and that they aren't alone in their distress. And that's where secure attachment begins to be formed. And here's the beautiful thing. When you mess up, because you will, you can repair. And rupture and repair is actually a crucial part of secure attachment. Your child needs to learn that disconnection can happen and that it can be mended. So when you lose your temper or maybe you're not present when they need you, you can come back later and acknowledge it. I'm sorry I yelled at you earlier. You were trying to tell me something and I wasn't listening. And that must have felt bad. And that teaches them that relationships can withstand conflict, that mistakes don't mean the end of connection, right? The same principles, they all apply in marriage or other relationships. Most marital conflict isn't about the content of the argument. It's about the emotional experience underneath. When your spouse says something critical or demanding, they're usually not trying to attack you, right? They're experiencing some kind of attachment threat. They're feeling unimportant or unseen or afraid that maybe you're pulling away. And if you can attune to that underneath layer, that deeper layer than what's on the surface, instead of just reacting to what's on the surface, everything stands a much better chance to change. And this requires slowing down. It requires being curious instead of defensive. It requires asking, what is happening for you and in you right now, and actually wanting to know that answer and not fix it or change it, but just exist in it for a moment. It requires believing that your spouse's emotional experiences make sense, even if you don't agree with their interpretation of events. And I know this sounds incredibly hard. It is hard, especially if you didn't experience this kind of attunement growing up, which I believe that most of us didn't. If your baseline is anxious attachment, you might feel like you're asking too much when you express a need. If your baseline is an avoidant attachment, you might feel suffocated by your spouse's emotional needs. And these patterns, they run deep and they're not one size fits all. They're very different and nuanced for each and every individual story and context. But again, there's hope because change and healing and an abundant life is possible. It's reachable. It happens through what researchers call corrective emotional experiences, moments where the old pattern gets interrupted and something new happens, right? So you expect rejection but receive understanding. You expect to be alone in your distress, but someone stays with you. You expect your needs to be too much, but they're welcomed. And these moments rewire the brain. Like I said, neuroplasticity is very real, and it's a gift from God. New neural pathways can form. Old triggers can lose their power. But it does take time and repetition. Time and repetition. Just like you can't go to the gym once and be fit forever. Unfortunately, I'm still waiting for them to invent a pill for that. But in that same way, you can't also have one good conversation and have your attachment wounds healed or your spouse's. Healing happens through sustained, repeated experiences of attunement. Sustained, repeated experiences. Repetition is so important, as I talked about in my previous video. And this is where community becomes so important, right? The church, at its best, is supposed to be a community of attunement. It's supposed to be a place where we practice being present to each other, where we bear one another's burdens, where we confess our struggles and receive grace instead of judgment. And when Paul talks about the body of Christ, he's describing an organism where each part is attuned to the others, where if one part suffers, every part suffers with it. And I'll be honest, many churches don't function this way. It's just true, not here in the West. We're often better at presenting a polished exterior than being honest about our struggles. That's not on just a corporate level, but on an individual level as well in our society. And we default to advice giving instead of presence. Now, let me close with this. If you're recognizing yourself in what I've been describing today, right? Like if you're seeing these patterns of insecure attachment in your life, or maybe you're realizing that you've been carrying wounds from childhood that are affecting your relationships today, right? I want you to know that there's no shame in that, that this is perhaps the normal human experience in the world we live. And you need to know this isn't a character flaw, right? Much of this is your nervous system trying to protect you based on what it learned a long time ago. But the path forward is not about white knuckling your way to different behavior. It's about finding relationships where you can experience attunement, where someone can be present to you in a way that helps your nervous system learn that connection is safe. That might be therapy with a professional. It might be a close friend. It might be a spouse who's willing to do the hard work alongside of you. It might be a small group or spiritual director, pastor, or pastoral counselor who really knows how to listen. And whenever you find it, it might be hard, but we have to learn how to let ourselves receive it. Let yourself be seen and known, right? That can be incredibly hard for people, for most of us who have not really ever experienced that. We don't know what that is or looks like, and it feels very weird or uncomfortable or even threatening. But let someone be present in your pain and to your pain without trying to fix it, because this is where healing begins. And as you experience it, you'll find yourself more able to offer it to others. You'll be able to be present to your children's distress without getting overwhelmed. You'll be able to hear your spouse's pain without defending yourself or explaining why you were innocent. You'll be able to sit with your friend who's struggling without needing to make it better, at least right away. And this is the work of love. Not the sentimental greeting card, right? Not that version of love, but the biblical, costly love that requires us to be present even when it's uncomfortable, right? To stay even when we want to flee, to let ourselves be affected by another person's experience. And in doing that work, we're participating in the healing that God is bringing to the world. We're mending what's broken. We're restoring what's been fragmented, right? We're learning to be the image bearers that we were always meant to be. People who can give and receive love, who can know and be known and to know others, right? Who can offer to each other the kind of attuned present that our soul was made for and needs to thrive. That's the invitation. To let yourself be healed, and in being healed, to become a source of healing for others. It's slow work. It requires repetition. It's a lifelong process, but it's work that matters most. At least I believe that. So I hope that today's video, though long, has been full of valuable information to you. I hope it's edified you in some way, shape, or form. I hope it encourages you to take the next step and seek professional guidance from a therapist, counselor, pastoral counselor, someone in that scope, and begin to do the work of healing for yourself, but also being a source of healing to others through your love and attunement as God works through you in the world. And so thank you so much for watching this video. I'd love to invite you to leave a comment. That really helps the channel so much and the video gain exposure. Subscribe. That helps us on this channel tremendously, and it means the world to me knowing that this work and the work I'm doing and putting energy into is helping someone in some way, shape, or form. So your comments mean the world to me, and I look forward to engaging with you in that. But also share it with a friend, a Facebook group, someone that you think that this could edify or benefit. But as always, until next time, God bless and stay free.